подвал.
Игорь,
Да,
живой?
да.
Давай в подвал.
Сюда. Давай. Давай сюда. Давай сюда. Женька, давай, подвал. Живой.
On June 1st, once again, the outskirts of Donetsk were shelled by Ukraine forces, this time killing 5 people and injuring 20. The footage that started this video was 2 different views of that, followed by a first-hand account taken by French journalist Crystal Neen.
Lance-roquettes multiples ouragans, ce qui explique les explosions rapprochées, parce qu'en fait le machin a dû larguer ses cassettes, et c'est ces cassettes en fait qu'on a dû entendre exploser les unes après les autres.
I wish my French were better, but she basically said that thing's the thing that exploded. She says the impact crater's right
Toutes les
here.
voitures autour.
I'm pretty sure what she's saying here is all
C'était
the
garé devant
destruction
la
you see
mine.
is from
La
the
mine,
mine that
vous voyez,
exploded.
complètement détruite.
She must have been in close proximity to one of the 5 civilians that died as a result of the shell. And then, later that night, she also caught or got footage from some of the locals, I believe, who saw some of the fires that the firefighters were still fighting at the end of the night. Hello, everybody. Wishbone812 here, and we've got a lot of information to go over. I think what we're going to start with is another CIA interview. It basically looks exactly the same as John Stockwell's interview. The CIA has not changed much. And not shockingly, he basically corroborates every single thing that I've been saying on this channel about the CIA's involvement in this war, the propaganda, everything. Let's just get to it.
Ukrainians have had a lot of support from the Central Intelligence Agency, and I got to work on one of the covert action programs back in 1985. It was against the Soviet Union, then in Afghanistan, and our ability to plant stories and put out information that would create the narrative that we wanted was remarkable back then. And this was pre-internet days. We literally were getting articles planted in magazines where the editors of the magazines, 1, believed that the CIA was a nefarious influence in the world, and 2, believed the CIA was trying to get information in their magazine. And the fact of the matter is we did, and they didn't know about it.
Once again, just one more person adding their 2 cents that Operation Mockingbird is in complete control of the narrative coming out of the Western media. Nothing new here. Let's move on.
Look at the U.S. With NATO and EUCOM, European Command exercises along the borders of Russia. And it's always portrayed that NATO is a defensive organization. Well, that's a bunch of crap.
The first bombing of its kind in NATO history. On March 24, 1999, Western nations carried out their threat against Serbia and began the biggest military conflict on Serbian soil since World War II. But what began as an attack on military targets soon expanded. Schools, monuments, homes, and even the Chinese embassy were hit. At the end of the campaign, 11 weeks later, Human Rights Watch estimates around 500 civilians were killed.
23 года назад 19 стран НАТО во главе с США устроили кровавое авианаступление на союзную республику Югославию без санкций Совета Безопасности ООН, в нарушение Хельсинского заключительного акта. Уничтожали не только военные объекты, но и школы, больницы, пассажирские поезда. Исполнители окрестили подлые воздушные атаки гуманитарной интервенцией во имя прав человека, имеющих приоритет даже над государственным суверенитетом.
Это я предложил бомбить Белград. Это я предложил отправить американских пилотов и взорвать все мосты над Дунаем.
Этот влиятельный сенатор дал старт военному преступлению под шильдой гуманитарной миссии. На территорию европейской страны было сброшено более 400 тысяч бомб, выпущено 3000 крылатых ракет. На головы мирных европейцев сбросили 22 тысячи тонн боеприпасов. Агрессия унесла жизни более 2000 человек, включая 400 детей. Ранены были свыше 10 тысяч граждан.
I do believe that the collateral damage which has been done by NATO is at an absolute minimum, and we take great care in both targeting and in terms of the application of firepower to ensure that collateral damage does not occur.
Early in 2011, Libya was faced with a chaotic insurrection, partly inspired by the revolts in Tunisia and Egypt, and partly led by Islamic fundamentalists. In March, NATO forces, mainly from France and Britain, began aerial bombardment on the pretext of protecting civilians, but the intervention sided with the rebels and armed them in violation of the UN Charter. With NATO's help, the opposition forces occupied the capital and later carried out the extrajudicial killing of Gaddafi. Since NATO's, quote, humanitarian intervention and the murder of Gaddafi, the country's territory has become a battleground between feuding warlords and Islamic fundamentalist groups, including the Islamic State. Libya no longer has a functioning government, and the gains in public welfare under Gaddafi have been greatly diminished.
كنا هون رجعنا صار ضرب قذايف وبعد نص ساعة ضربت الطيارة. لا أبوي أمي وأخوتي ماتوا انقاد بالألقام، وأبوي هون مات هون. قاد. أهلي أبوي وعمي وبنات عمي 2 صغار ونسيب خالي وبنته.
In March 2019, the U.S. military and its Syrian allies attacked the remnants of ISIS in a small corner of Syria called Baghouz. The U.S. military said it was supporting its allies on the ground, the mostly Kurdish SDF, or Syrian Defense Forces, against 200 ISIS fighters, including women and child combatants. On March 18, 2019, U.S. aircraft heavily bombed those ISIS fighters, whom the U.S. says were threatening to overrun the SDF and had already caused 30 casualties. The U.S. military says it launched an investigation that initially determined the bombs had killed 4 civilians and wounded 8, that they were in legitimate self-defense and proportional. But the New York Times' investigation found that regional commanders immediately knew there were as many as 70 civilian casualties, and the Defense Department since then, quote, concealed the strike.
The U.S. gave the regime its first taste of a strategy called shock and awe. Downtown Baghdad lit up in explosions and balls of fire. hundreds of bombs and cruise missiles ripping into Saddam Hussein's palaces, into the headquarters of his secret police and his security structure. On this one day, sources say the U.S. used more than 1,500 bombs and cruise missiles throughout the country.
We only see a slice of the whole battlefield on television, where there were cameras, specifically Baghdad today. But this was a violent representation of what is happening in many places. The U.S. fired 600 cruise missiles at Iraq today, $600 million worth of technology. The British fired some too. The United States flew 1,500 missions today, 700 of which were bombing raids. On the ground, U.S. and British forces pushed into Iraq.
So yeah, basically the next time someone calls NATO a defensive coalition, you just ask them if they think you are retarded, because you have got to be frickin' retarded to even consider the lunacy of calling NATO a defensive operation. How many of those places were invading a NATO country? Was Africa invading a NATO country? Was the Middle East invading a NATO country? Was Serbia invading a NATO country? These people are freaking ridiculous. Just absolute pieces of shit. Anyway, let's go back to our nice interview with the CIA, ex-CIA guy.
They scrubbed the website. On this EUCOM website, they described doing a cyber warfare training. And in it, they explicitly stated it was for offensive operations. Okay, there goes the NATO's just about defense. Mm-hmm. The Marine Corps had a video up showing their troops in an amphibious landing craft landing on the shores of Ukraine in an exercise. How in God's name that is a defensive exercise, I'll never understand. So I always like to try to look at it from the standpoint of what do the Russians think? Because if I'm a Russian military analyst, or if I'm an intelligence officer, I'm looking at this saying, this is not pretend, this is not game. The United States has a genuine plan to attack us, to invade us. You've got to make that as an assumption. You can't assume, oh, they're just kidding, because they're not kidding. Look over the last 30 years. The only country in the world to have launched more military operations against other countries is the United States. If you doubt that, go ask the Iraqis. They got the treatment twice. The Afghanis, they got it. The Panamanians. And let's go back 42 years. Grenada. And don't forget the folks in the Baltics and Syria. Oh, and Libya. So it's really a list of death and destruction, and it has not produced peace, tranquility, or angels. So I've come to the conclusion the real reason for the anger directed at Putin by political types in the United States goes to the heart of the matter is Putin will not allow Russia to be raped of its resources. That's the bottom line.
Yeah.
And I believe I talked about this in my video, how the media is lying to you about Putin. If not, I've definitely heard Robert Barnes talk about it. I think I might have a clip of him speaking about it somewhere in that video. But interesting enough, as I was making this video, I found this clip of a different world leader who the Shadow Empire decided they need to put him out of office and kill him.
هم ليش يزحفوا نحو روسيا؟ الحلف الأطلسي ماشي نحو روسيا نحو روسيا، نفس أهداف نابليون وهتلر هي أهداف الحلف الأطلسي، الوصول إلى البترول والغاز والفحم والحديد نتاع روسيا لاحتلالها، هذه واضحة جدا.
When all of this was heating up, I was taking the time to watch his speeches and his addresses. There was, I wish to God we had someone like that in charge of our country right now, because frankly, he was rational, he was reasonable, he was very direct, he was informed, he was coherent and articulate. So that was complete opposite of the picture that was painted in the West of some snarling madman.
So basically, I have such faith in Putin's ability to speak and the fact that the CIA agent is telling the truth about Putin, that what I did is I just literally went into YouTube and looked up Putin's speech with English subtitles, because I prefer subtitles to dubs. And I just went with the first video that I found, and literally this is the segment that I found, so I'll play it for you. It's actually quite pertinent. And all the things that Putin talks about in this are things that I've talked about on my channel, which I've independently verified with primary sources anyway.
Отмечу, что Украина, поощряемая Соединенными Штатами и рядом западных стран, целенаправленно готовилась к силовому сценарию, кровавой бойне и этническим чисткам на Донбассе. Массированное наступление на Донбасс, а затем на Крым, было только вопросом времени. И наши вооруженные силы сорвали эти планы. В Киеве не только готовились к войне, к агрессии против России, против Донбасса. Они ее вели. Не прекращались попытки организовать в Крыму диверсии и террористическое подполье. Все последние годы продолжались боевые действия на Донбассе, обстрелы мирных населенных пунктов. За это время погибло почти 14 тысяч мирных граждан, среди них дети. 14 марта по центру Донецка, как вы знаете, был нанесен ракетный удар. Это был откровенный кровавый теракт, который унес жизни больше 20 человек. И такие обстрелы продолжаются все последние дни. Бьют без разбора, по площадям, с фанатизмом и остервенением обреченных. Это как фашисты, которые в последние дни Третьего Рейха пытались утащить с собой в могилу как можно больше невинных жертв. Но что поражает своим запредельным цинизмом, это не только беспардонная ложь Киева, заявление, что это Россия, додумались и до этого, якобы запустила ракету по Донецку, но и то, что так называемый цивилизованный западный мир, европейская и американская пресса даже не заметили трагедии Донецка. Как будто ничего и не было. Именно так же лицемерно они отводили глаза и все последние 8 лет, когда матери на Донбассе хранили своих детей, когда убивали стариков. Это просто какая-то моральная и нравственная деградация, полное расчеловечивание. Многолетнее издевательство над жителями Донбасса невозможно было больше терпеть. И чтобы положить конец геноциду, Россия признала Народные Республики Донбасса, заключила с ними договоры о дружбе и взаимопомощи. На основании этих соглашений республики обратились к нашей стране за военной помощью в отражении агрессии. И мы эту помощь оказали.
And in regard to the factuality of what Putin just said, every single one of those statements I have been able to back up with primary sources throughout the length of my channel. And if you'd like to see the rocket strike on Donetsk that killed, I believe, 26 people, you can see that in the beginning of my video, Defeating the Narrative by Searching for Truth in Ukraine. And the funerals of just a few of the children in Donbas that have been slaughtered by the Ukraine forces, in conjunction with Nazi paramilitary forces that, for all intents and purposes, are NATO CIA joint operation forces, under the Ukraine version of Operation Gladio, if you're familiar with that, which you should become familiar with Operation Gladio if you actually want to understand what's going on in the world. If you want to see pictures of those funerals, you should watch my video, The Secret Behind the Buffalo Shooter, which, as it happens, is has about 10 times the number of views as any of my other videos, because it is so pertinent to the situation in America. I really recommend watching it. It is an expose on the Azov Battalion and the Nazi problem that we are funding in Ukraine.
And when I tried to point out, well, Putin is actually an Orthodox Christian. Oh, no, he's not. Well, yes, he is, but ignore that. And within that, they ignored that, I think Putin has raised some very legitimate questions about the degeneracy of the West. And in fact, I think one of the driving forces for the criticism is the homosexual influence in U.S. media. They're pushing back against Russia just on that very issue.
And I'm glad Larry Johnson brought this up, because it's something that I've brought up a few times, that Putin is one of the only leaders out there outspoken against the LGBT movement, and he's literally the only one that I know of. Maybe Orban is like that, I don't know, but I haven't heard Orban say it. Anyway, if you want to hear about my take on that, you can watch my video, How the American Church Has Been Tricked into Hating Russia, which, additionally to going over Putin, it goes over the actual form of the Shadow Empire, what it is actually like, a little bit of the history of the CIA and how it became a Satanist movement. And also, if you're into this kind of thing, I start by showing how there's a co-opted view of Russia that's been circulated amongst people that are that understand the tribulation is happening soon, where they have misinterpreted scriptures that apply to China and India, the Gog-Magog war in Ezekiel 38, and have misattributed it to Russia by mistranslating the verse. But anyway, if you're interested in that, you can check out this video.
And I started in 1996 for a while. I've been effectively banned from the media over the last 10 years. But I've never seen this level of propaganda and deliberate suppression of alternative views as is going on right now. And the only thing I can attribute it to is the corporate control of the media. It's become a money-making business without regard to truth, without regard to actually informing people, and they've really lost their way. And as a result, the American people suffer. They can easily be led around. Social media outlets like this, podcasts like yours, provide an alternative, and it does reach at least hundreds of thousands, if not more. And but it's not totally effective in countering the propaganda.
And now Larry doesn't mention Operation Mockingbird here or pin this on the CIA in this segment of his interview, but he does mention it elsewhere, which is why I actually played that part first. So he does mention that the reason for all this propaganda is ultimately a CIA operation, which I actually think is the reason how the media got put into 6 different conglomerates to begin with. It's just easier to manage if you only have to blackmail or basically turn 6 people into assets. It's much easier. And really beyond that, when you really get down to it, I mean, Michael Bloomberg, Warren Buffett, Oprah, and Ted Turner are all part of the Satanic Empire. They're one of the 10 rulers in the empire. So I mean, that's like 2/3 of all the Western media to begin with. Then you have the Rockefeller Bank and the Rothschilds Bank, which has a massive amount of all the money, financial sector that can put pressure on anyone else, like the Amazon guy. What's his name? Jeff Bezos. And then beyond that, you've got Rupert Murdoch, who owns Fox News and the conservative side of things, and he's like literally eyeballs deep in the military-industrial complex, which the military-industrial complex is a sector of Leviathan that kind of does its own thing sometimes, because it's got all the conservatives and like the Republican Party, the GOP and all that. So basically, already the leaders, the owners of all the media are already literally a part of the Satanic Empire. And then on top of that, these organizations, I mean, some like the New York Times were literally made by the CIA, and then others have just been deeply penetrated since the 1940s and 1950s. I mean, like, at this point, I mean, look, Sean Hannity's got a CIA pin because he's literally a CIA asset. And it's just all over. You can't miss it.
Just one more example of this desire of the United States to intervene, and in the process of intervening, not making the world a better place. I'm literally a child of this generation. I mean, I was born in 1955, about the time that we're overthrowing the elected leader of Iran, and then followed by ousting the president in Guatemala. The United States has a long litany of interfering in the affairs of other governments in order to bend it to our will. And yet, the ones that we always cite as the reason we're doing this is because then the Soviets and now the Russians are trying to take over the world, and we're trying to prevent that for democracy and truth, and it's a lie.
Yep, not much more I can say to that. Other than that, I wholeheartedly agree. Let's continue.
God, that Russia did intervene in Syria back then, because the United States was arming the rebels, the Syrian, the Islamists, not just people wanting to oust Assad, but they were genuinely sending it to the Islamic radicals.
Yeah.
And that goes back to Benghazi. That's part of the reason Benghazi, they covered up what happened there, because Benghazi was the shipment point, the staging point for those weapons.
And we've talked about multiple times about how NATO is an empire. It's a satanic empire. It's part of Leviathan, which is a bunch of Satanist Nazis that are trying to take over the world. And the CIA, which is where Leviathan really kind of started, is basically has a long history of arming psychopaths because they are psychopaths. So it is what it is.
The Ukrainian operation, they recognized that they're going to have to fight from a defensive posture because they've lost their offensive capability. So all they can do is fight a holding action. And part of it, too, is, and I think it had help from my former organization, the CIA, and from the U.S. military, of embedding themselves in civilian areas in order to, one, cause the Russians to hesitate in attacking, and two, if the Russians do attack, to be able to gain some propaganda value from saying, see, the Russians are just wantonly killing civilians.
All right, a couple things to say here. First of all, in regard to the Ukrainian military using people as human shields, which he brings up, several of those interviews of the Ukrainians on the ground, maybe about a dozen or so, are in my documentary, Defeating the Narrative by Searching for Truth in Ukraine. Now, besides that, he brings up how the Ukrainian military has no offensive capability. Similarly, Jacob Dreisen actually said the same thing on the Duran a few days ago. And for those of you who have watched my videos, you know that I talked about it weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, actually. And so if you want to know how I knew before all of the military people talked about it, it's because of my understanding of the Shadow Empire, and it's because of something called strategic empathy, which is where you put yourself in your enemy's shoes, you understand him, you understand how he operates, you think the way that you know he thinks, you act, you think about how he would act by putting yourself in his position, and you assume that he is coherent, that he's not crazy, even if he's evil, he's not crazy. And then you take his view on things, and you assume what he's going to do, and you see his plans. And by having strategic empathy, I was able to see in advance, before all these military commanders brought it up to our attention, that the strategy in Ukraine was never to win through a military offense, but rather to use defense and economic sanctions as the offensive weapon.
Should be done if you have a competent military, and what's not happening. That tells me right there that the Ukrainian army's ability to effect command and control of mobile forces larger than 150 or say even 600 people has been eliminated. They can't do it, or they haven't been able to do it so far in 3 months. We've not seen a single instance. Yet when Russia starts pulling out of these cities north of Kiev, it's touted as, oh, they were forced out by the Ukrainians. Or the other day, oh, the Ukrainians have captured the border of Russia. They've broken through north of Kharkiv. And you look at these guys, they're out in the middle of the woods carrying, a blue and yellow totem pole. And I'm going, wait a second. There are actual roads where there's an actual border crossing with border guards. If you show me the Ukrainians attacking that and taking out Russian border guards, then I'll give them credit for they've taken a border post. But this is like me going out to my backyard with my own blue and yellow pole and declaring it, oh, this is the border of Ukraine. I mean, come on, nonsense.
And we'll get back shortly to the military situation on the ground, but suffice it to say, it is going extremely poorly for Ukraine, and the things I predicted a few weeks ago about their defenses in Donbas crumbling is taking place.
The Russians had actually evacuated 2 days before, and then I started looking on social media, because you think you know, if the Russians are going around rounding people up, taking them out and executing them, the internet was still up. Social media was still functioning in that area. There is not one tweet, not one whisper that such an event was taking place. And it was only a day after the mayor of Bucha, you know, had declared, "Oh, we're free, we're liberated, free at last, thank God Almighty," that then all of a sudden these horrific images started to emerge. And, you know, that told me it was a complete staged event. Those were actually dead people. And I think the Ukrainians are responsible for killing some of them. Some of them may have died in an artillery strike and had been moved to that location in order to make it appear that the Russians were these murderous thugs.
And I've gone over this on multiple of my videos, but the one I went over it the most is Ukraine-Russia Update Bucha, where I go over the French journalist's testimony that he was with Azov, the Ukrainian Nazi part of the military, that was literally while they were shelling their own civilians in Bucha. And then, of course, who can forget this picture posted by @MapsUkraine, which is showing the 1,000 journalists that the CIA brought to Bucha in order to make that ridiculous story. And you can even see them surrounding a cat, taking pictures of the cat like it's the Wag the Dog, the movie, come to life.
Because the other thing it didn't make sense about it is that Russia has been cautious about taking civilian casualties and completely destroying infrastructure that's essential for civilian survival. They have not fought this war as, you know, the U.S. always would do shock and awe, where we didn't care what we blew up. Right. Remember Fallujah literally leveled that place in Iran.
And I think we've gotten that point across, so we'll go back to the last part of his interview that I thought was pertinent, and then we'll move on to other things.
And they made a visit to Ukraine. And during this visit, they show up at one of these SS commemorations. They are commemorating the Waffen SS division of the Ukrainian division that's worked with and fought alongside the Nazis. And there was literally a man in his 90s who says to the son of von Wachter, "Oh, I remember your father. I wish he was back here. He did such a great job of cleaning up all these Jews." And I'm going, I mean, this was recent. And so when I started looking into it, I was shocked. There will be, I think, some other news coming out in the next few weeks. For example, some of the members of the Azov Battalion, for example, they were present in Washington, D.C. on January 6th. They were flown here by Alexandra Chalupa. And they were brought in specifically to help provoke and incite the crowd. The people I'm familiar with, they've got the flight information, the hotel information, so it's not made up.
Now, this is actually very encouraging and interesting for him to hear this from him, because actually in my own segment in my documentary, Defeating the Narrative by Searching for Truth in Ukraine, when I was going over the fact that Bandera had been hailed as a hero in Ukraine for almost a generation now, and they got just tons of monuments to a bunch of Nazis all over the place. I relate it immediately to American politics and to the overthrow of President Trump in 2020, because the same people were involved. Now, I didn't know all the details at the time, but it came out, I found from Darren Beatty in Revolver News about a week later, about how Norm Eisen was actually the person that masterminded both. And, his whole crew was definitely involved in January 6th as well, kind of as the wrap-up smear in order to basically functionally turn the nation's attention away from the stolen election and kind of plant this idea of insurrection in everyone's head to make out the Trump supporters as the bad guys. It was a false flag done by the CIA, actually mainly by the FBI, but they're part of the whole intelligence complex anyway. But again, a lot of the things such as the BLM movement, Antifa, the riots, all of the lawfare of changing election laws. All of that was done not just in America in 2020, but in Ukraine in 2014 as well, by the same people, Norm Eisen, his crew, which were the same people that were involved in the Trump impeachment. And I go over that in Defeating the Narrative by Searching for Truth in Ukraine, as well as additional information on the Ukraine-Russia conflict. So yeah, if you want to check those out, they're great videos. Have at it. And with that said, we're going to move to the military situation on the ground. Now, 3 weeks ago, I gave a prediction that the situation in the Donbas would conclude around the first week of July. So far, it is still looking like that may be the case. There have been several Ukrainian routes where they have just completely abandoned positions, lots of surrenders. And Azovstal surrendered a week ago. When Azovstal did surrender, funnily enough, the entire world media said that it was an evacuation, when in fact it was a complete surrender of about 2,400 troops, which, if you watched my video from a few weeks ago, when I talked about how Azovstal was going to surrender, I said that the Russian Ministry of Defense said there were 2,400 troops inside of it, so they were correct. Again, the Russian Ministry of Defense has so far been more accurate than pretty much anyone else. They don't share a lot, but when they do share, they tend to be pretty accurate so far. Now, worse than their sudden retreats, which is something they have not done up until Azovstal, after the Azovstal surrender, has been the decisions they've made to defend positions which were undefendable, and they have sustained heavy losses. This happened in Severodonetsk a few days ago, where a large group of their troops fought to the death in the industrial complexes of Severodonetsk and were annihilated. Now, simultaneously to this, the media, both the Ukrainian media, which is run by the CIA, and the Western media, all declared that this was a massive victory. However, for the first time since the war started, they got pushback from a member of the Ukrainian media. A Ukrainian journalist is now calling out the Ukrainian government for lying to the people, saying that it's bad. This is interesting. It shows a further fracturing of the Leviathan system, and of the loss of the grip on the narrative by the CIA. Unfortunately, it is of my opinion, and I have a lot of good reason to believe this, that the narrative has reached critical mass in Ukraine, and that nothing can turn it around. Now, in America, what you are seeing is that the CNN is coming out. We've got multiple people from the Democratic Party coming out and saying that Ukraine needs to surrender, that they need to negotiate because they will not be able to win militarily. The New York Times come out and said the same thing. And also you have members of the French government. Macron said the same thing. The Italian government has said the same thing. So you have here a fracturing of the shadow empire as people are abandoning the project. They don't want to be sitting there. Basically, they don't want to get caught being pro-Ukraine when they lose, when it becomes apparent that they lose. But like I said earlier, in Ukraine itself, I believe that it has reached critical mass. And George Soros, I don't think, will change his mind. Now, there is some talk of a Bilderberg, which is one of those fancy groups where all the Satanists get together and have their secret talks. And apparently, people are saying that they are talking about how Ukraine needs to negotiate. But I do not believe that will actually take place. Now, Putin continues to say that he's willing to negotiate, and I believe that he actually is willing. However, he will only negotiate from a place of reality, which means he's basically going to demand that Ukraine give him the things that he would just win militarily anyway. And by giving them over, they're going to save themselves bloodshed and a loss of their military. But Ukraine won't do that. And a lot of the leaders of not just the West, but in Ukraine itself are completely delusional. They've bought into the false reality that's been constructed for them, that they've been pushing. On the one hand, they at some point they knew that it was completely fake, and they know a lot of it is fake, but they're pretty much divorced from reality at this point by pushing the lie. And because of that, they won't be able to negotiate with Russia in a meaningful way. So there will be no meaningful negotiation, though I believe that after Donbas falls, which I believe will be in early July, you're going to see Russia take Zaporozhye and Kharkiv in the north as well, which I think will just take a few more weeks. I think at that point that Putin will give a chance to negotiate. I believe that chance will be either rejected, outright rejected, or rejected for all intents and purposes because Ukraine won't actually meet the demands, and that Russia will then take Odessa. Now, in the political context, I believe that America will abandon them. I believe that most of Europe will also abandon Ukraine, so that by the time Russia takes Odessa, which I believe will take between 1 and 2 months, so that would be either at the beginning of September or the beginning of October, is I think when this war will be over with the fall of Odessa. That by then, Ukraine will be standing by itself. It will have no more help from the United States, no more help from Europe. The Shadow Empire will just wash its hands of it, and it will be done. And then they'll actually go in and start scavenging and use their NGOs to rape the people and rape Ukraine of the rest of its resources that it still has. And it'll be like Haiti, just a complete shit show, just a wasteland. A wasteland that is used by the elites of the empire. So it's going to be horrible. And one last thing to note for the political realm is that Putin always has to keep the option open for legitimate negotiations with Ukraine in order to keep its good political standing with the global south, that is with Africa, with South America, and with Asia. Because those countries expect him to be willing to negotiate at any point, and he, in all honesty, I think he would do that anyway, because he's a man of peace for the most part anyway. But moving on, just to go back to the military assessment. Something to really realize is that the two militaries are fighting completely different wars. Ukraine is fighting a propaganda war where they're always trying to make a headline. That's why they attacked Snake Island and got annihilated. It's why they attacked the border of Kharkiv and Russia and got annihilated. It's why they tried to keep Severodonetsk and got annihilated. And it's why they've constantly tried to have military incursions into the Russian forces that were stupid. They were horribly done and resulted in massive losses. On the other hand, Russia has constantly been blasted by the media as sucking in the war because they have constantly made the use of strategic and tactical withdrawals. And that's because Russia is not attempting to gain land. One of the things that Alexander Makuris said early on is that the Russian military follows the military doctrine of Clausewitz, who says that it is not the capture of cities, but rather the destruction of armies that is the quickest path to victory. And this is more so the case in Donbas, where the population actually wants to be a part of Russia. All of the places in Donbas all declared their independence. They all have formally requested Russia's intervention. These are all places where they don't want anything to do with Ukraine anymore. It's, once the Ukrainian military is out of it, is annihilated, then these places will be a part of Russia. You don't need to convince the population. You don't need an army to hold these places. These places will hold themselves. So with that said, I do want to give an economic prediction based off of the information that I've now gotten to see. Is that I predict that economically, well, I've already said that both Europe and America are going to go into an inflationary recession at the very least, perhaps a depression. The EU is going to be basically post-apocalyptic. It's going to be like a desert. Historia is already like completely falling apart with like a 22% rate of inflation. A lot of that is due to the sanctions. Most of it's due to the sanctions, and also from the lockdowns as well. But the sanctions are really destroying Europe because Europe depends on Russia for their gas and oil. Now, recently, the EU came out with this oil plan to ban Russian oil. Now, Orban said he won't deal with it all. So Hungary is going to get Russian oil at the prices they normally get it at. But the other places in the EU, in order to get oil by ship, they're not going to be able to do it. So the Greek ship owners are going to be taking Russian oil and then selling it to themselves and then selling it to the Europeans. It'll still be Russian oil, but it'll be like sold either through the Greek ships, which are just going to pretend like it's not Russian anymore and charge extra, or it's going to go through India, and then the Indians are going to refine it and then sell it, and they're just going to pretend that it's not Russian anymore because India refined it first. But either way, the oil in Europe is going to be much more expensive. This is going to result in a collapse of the German industrial complex. The German industry. It's going to be at an end. Germany is going to deindustrialize. It's going to be instead of post-industrial, I'm going to call it post-apocalyptic, because that's really what Europe is going to be like. It's going to be a freak show over there. All right, so over the last 5 minutes or so, I've actually been going through some articles, which I recorded a video of them because I want to actually talk about them. And of course, one way that I can give that information to you that's even better than just a link is by actually going through it while I talk. So yeah, if you want, you can always just scroll back, 5.5 minutes and actually read them if you want to. The first one that I went over is from Gray Zone, and this is just another example of proving again, for like the millionth time, that all the big tech censorship is part of Mockingbird. Basically, some guy named Paul Mason has been going after different alternate tech, real actual news organizations actually trying to bring out the truth, and he's trying to squash them on big tech. Nothing crazy. Funny enough, even Scary Poppins makes an appearance in that article, I'm pretty sure. And actually, I got some people trying to fact check me on a Ukraine video, the one with the Ukrainian media calling for the extermination of Russian people in Donetsk, and they're actually quoting they quoted some organization called stopfake.org, and I saw it and I was like, lol. I'm like, I bet this is a CIA cutout, and then sure as shit. I click on them, and they're a Ukrainian-based organization that's a CIA cutout. That's not only is it a fact-checking organization, it's a CIA cutout organization in Ukraine, specifically for the purpose of fact-checking any information about the Ukrainian, the government over there. And sure enough, I only dug in 3 seconds and found that Scary Poppins was part of that operation as well. She's just everywhere. She's in every single one of these, psyops. Then after that article, I showed a Twitter thread where Elena, I don't know how to say her last name here, translated a YouTube video with just tons, I think maybe 15 or 20, don't quote me, a lot of interviews of people in Mariupol who were coming out and saying how their houses were being destroyed, either shelled, shot with tanks, or burned purposefully by the Ukrainian military as they were retreating because they wanted to destroy the city before it was taken by Russia. And this actually just we already knew that because Patrick Lancaster was told the same thing, and some of those testimonies are in the documentary Defeating the Narrative by Searching for Truth in Ukraine, which is on this channel. And then lastly, I showed an article about how a former SBU, that's the Ukrainian secret police, basically a whistleblower came out and said that it's the CIA's idea for the torture and kidnapping plot, which we've actually gone over in a different video, which was Ukraine-Russia conflict additional information, which was additional information pertaining to defeating the narrative by searching for truth in Ukraine. In that, we went over the SBU and the CIA. I knew it was the CIA already. Attacking journalists. They took 400 civilians in Kharkiv, including Gonzalo Lira, took them captive, and for posting, tweets on Twitter and stuff. And they killed some journalists. And anyway, this article goes really in depth. It's excellently constructed article into how the CIA is doing the same thing in Ukraine that they did in Vietnam under Operation Phoenix, where they killed and tortured a bunch of journalists. And it's just a terrorism organization. It's horrifying. And Gonzalo Lira on his Twitter handle has his pinned tweet is about these journalists in Ukraine that have been captured, tortured, and killed by the SBU. Now going back to how this video began with the shelling of Donetsk, I do have one other piece of footage I found of a young woman whose house was destroyed, or apartment. So we're going to show that footage as well.
Газом воняет, надо газ вызывать.
And I'll be honest, with all the coverage I've done of this war and seeing corpses, people burned, crucified, shot in the head, I don't even know how to feel about this, but it's like when I saw this young woman crying, and from what I've read on Twitter, people that actually speak Ukrainian or Russian say that she's mainly just upset about her house being destroyed, which is like it's her whole livelihood. I don't think anyone that she knew died. I could be wrong, but that's what I get out of the translations I've seen. And it's like my first thought when seeing this is, I'm just glad I'm not staring at her corpse. And it's like the tragedy is so great in this region, from what they have been suffering for years, that I look at a young woman's livelihood destroyed, and my first thought is I'm just glad that she's not dead. And with that said, we're going to go into another story, because apparently this is the anniversary of a missile attack from several years back. Actually, was a few days ago. And that was actually the last time that CNN, or actually any major Western media news story in general, actually told the truth about how the Ukrainians' military has been purposely targeting civilians in Donetsk and Lugansk.
The bloody aftermath of a strike on the separatist headquarters in the heart of Luhansk. 5 women killed, 3 men, officials say. Not fighters necessarily, more passers-by, the debris of normal life snuffed out. No chance against this sudden and powerful onslaught. This was the moment of impact. Separatists blame the Ukrainian Air Force, the Kiev government saying instead that a rebel missile had misfired. A munitions expert with CNN in Luhansk says damage to the tops of trees in the square next to the building strongly indicate fire from the air. The Ukrainians claim that this had nothing to do with a military aircraft which was circling overhead at the time of the attack. But from what we can tell, this looks like very heavy cannon fire from an aircraft strafing through this square. You can see there are a dozen or so craters just like this coming straight through this square and up the building. If this was an attempt by the Ukrainian Air Force to hit the separatist headquarters here, then it was a very accurate strike.
The
Prime Minister of the self-declared People's Republic of Luhansk says he hopes the attack will spur Russia's president to action. We appealed to Russia to send us peacekeepers, he says. I think after the whole world sees what happened to peaceful civilians in the center of our town, they'll send them quicker.
And this, of course, goes back to something that I've said a few times, actually a bunch of times on Twitter, because everyone on Twitter wants to speak for the Ukrainians. Then I show them videos of what the Ukrainians actually say, and they're like, oh, that's disinformation. Oh, they're not allowed to talk. We have to talk for them, because they're a bunch of bigots. Anyway, Chernobyevka, a city in Kherson region of Ukraine, has been getting missiles striked and shelled from Nikolaev, the Ukrainian military Nikolaev, every day for about a month, maybe 2 months now. And they've had civilians die on almost a daily basis. And Patrick Lancaster was there a few days ago.
I'm Patrick Lancaster, and right now we are in the Kherson region of Ukraine. And this home was hit at 8 o'clock last night by purportedly Ukrainian Uragan missile. There was at least one person killed here last night and one person injured. There's bits of body parts all across this rubble.
То есть человека практически разорвало, правильно, на куски?
Да. Он как раз попал в самую
центр. То есть куда прилетела эта точка, где?
Он был на кухне и горел. Please introduce yourself.
My name is Kirill. I here like chief our Kherson region, and now we have here this very not bad situation in Chernobyevka. I work in administration Kherson region area. Understand me?
Yeah. And can you kind of tell us what happened here today?
We have here in Chernobyevka, this is how like small town, a lot of people who, Chernobyevka, this is Russian army, here not Russian army, here not Russian bus, how like bus?
The base.
Base. Here live only civilian. We have here one body, one people who live this house, yeah, but he killed now. He killed, and this is work Ukrainian army, Ukrainian VSU put here. This is bomb and our towns in the Kherson region.
Well, where did they fire it from?
I think so. This is Nikolaev.
And how do you know that it was Ukraine that did it?
How do you know?
Как вы знаете?
I think so. This is perimeter. Yeah. This is Nikolaev. Here maybe 50 kilometers. Yeah. And 50 kilometers. This is for a reaction bomb who put here. Yeah. This is put only Nikolaev because in Ukrainian army every day put here this is bomb. Yeah.
In this area.
In this area, only Chernobyevka. You hear Chernobyevka. This is a special area for killed Russian troops, yeah. But here not Russian troops. Here live only civilian people in Chernobyevka, and this is not first place where we stay now, yeah. Because 2 days ago one people killed, 3 days ago one people killed, only civilian people
in this area.
In this area, yeah.
Understand. And can you tell us what kind of weapon was used here?
This is Uragan missile, and this is reaction special bomb, yeah. And this is special bomb work only 40 or 50 kilometers, no more.
And you don't have to take our word for it. You can actually hear it from the Ukrainian forces themselves. They actually release videos bragging about firing on this village. We can take a look here.
Чорнобаївка буде збирати орків навалу. Ну а ми всі дружно скажем very well. Шо ти, росіянин? Welcome to hell. Welcome to hell. Чорнобаївка, Чорнобаївка, це всі русні роз'їбаївка.
There, you see it from them themselves. There's really no other words they can say. This is a civilian area, no military targets. We're here with the military today, the Russian military, to see what the situation is. But we're going to continue on here in Kherson, show you all the facts, all the stories that need to be told.
In fact, the situation here in Chernobyivka has been so distressing that the leader of the Ukrainian military in Kherson region has defected to the Russian Federation. He has resigned his commission to Ukraine and actually resigned his citizenship for Ukraine and turned it in for a Russian citizenship. And when he is asked why he did this, this is his answer.
Или уже установочно, или к позициям. Непосредственно по Херсонской области, сама Чернобаевка, такое мое родное село, вследствие вот этих вот бомбежек и вследствие нанесения этих ударов пострадало где-то около 200 домов. Мое мнение, что надо это заканчивать, навести порядок в этом Херсоне. Я, как житель этого города, согласен по необходимости защищать этот город от различного вида влияния незаконного, преступного со стороны украинских властей. И совместно это делать совместно с подразделениями Российской Федерации.
Now, referring back to the torture campaign run by the CIA, using the SBU as assets within Ukraine, one of their torture prisons was actually recaptured. It was liberated by the Lugansk People's Republic and Russian forces a few days ago. And the prisoners were released and they were able to tell their stories. Now, a lot of this was already known by people that have been in and out of the prison over the last few years, but I did want to show you the footage of one of the officials in Lugansk giving Eva Bartlett a tour of that facility. Also, this picture above is actually graffiti that was written on the walls by the prison guards.
Дальше, в отношении непосредственно пыток. То есть нужно понимать, что Айдаром применялись не только пытки, которые физические, скажем так, это избиение, изнасилование, подвешивание за различные части тела. Также применялись пытки психологические. Светлана сейчас еще. Это было из области фантастики. Единственный раз, когда выводили людей помыться, это перед обменом. Причем вот здесь тоже на это нужно обратить внимание, что перед обменом человека одевали, человеку давали возможность помыться. То есть они понимали, что совершают военное преступление. И что в момент обмена может быть фиксация телеканалов и всех остальных. То есть тут резко под обмен человека начинали хоть немного подкармливать. Человека начинали приводить в маломальски божеский вид. Для того, чтобы на человеке меньше было видно вот следов избиения и всего остального. То есть они понимали, что совершают преступление и даже таким образом пытались его... За 8 лет ни одна, как украинская, так и общеевропейская структура, которая на свои знамена поднимает поддержание демократии, будь то Human Rights Watch, да, все остальные, БДИЧ, ну то есть ОБСЕ, старались не замечать происходящего здесь. Несмотря на то, что информация, полученная от людей, освободившихся отсюда в 2014-2015 году, нами распространялась, в том числе в сети YouTube и все тому подобное, с этими людьми, при том, что мы давали их полные данные, как бы при желании можно было приехать в Луганск и с ними пообщаться. Никто из европейских, американских, общесветовых, скажем так, общемировых правозащитных организаций с этими людьми не связался и не захотел все-таки расследовать преступления, совершенные здесь, на территории этого колбасного цеха.
But no, CNN reports it can find no war crimes being done by Ukraine in the Donbas. not that they reported on it themselves 8 years ago. Now, moving on, we just have a few more stories to go. This is a big update. Got a lot of information, especially that long CIA interview. That was a great interview with Eva Bartlett. Yes, speaking of false flags, which is something we've talked about quite a bit on this channel, such as Bucha, such as Kramatorsk. I came across a video by Patrick Lancaster in Anadol, Donetsk, which 2 months ago was basically liberated by Russia. And the civilians there were saying that Ukraine was putting on Russian uniforms and then using tanks to fire at buildings.
Армия бьет, конечно, била украинская армия, конечно.
Ага. И как это было это время?
Как это было? Как это было? Ехало 2 танка. Это я видела своими глазами, потому что я была на улице. Ехало 2 танка украинских. 3-й танк немножечко остановился, он отстал от них. 2 со скоростью сумасшедшей проскочили на гору, а 3-й начал обстрел по селу. И когда он 3 раза выпустил свои гранаты, и чем там танк стреляет этот, он попал вот туда, и потом 2 раза он туда, в ту сторону попал, а 3-й раз он разрушил угол на садике. Это я видела своими глазами, потому что я бежала в подвал.
So, вы сказал, украинский танк стреляет на украинский контроль садик.
Они обстреливали наше село. Они обстреливали наше село. Кидали.
Ага, это провокация.
Конечно, это натурально.
Кто провокация?
Укропская провокация, натуральная. Натурально. Никогда, я вам сейчас скажу, у меня муж служил в танковых войсках. Никогда танкистам не выдают запасную форму в танк. Значит, они сели в свой танк, взяли запасную форму. Это что за идиотство такое? Мы что, дебилы, что ли, все такие?
Ага, вы сказали, украинские танкисты...
Да, вот они с балки вышли. Вот вы же не знаете местность. Они вышли с балки оттуда и делали провокацию. А русские танки у нас стояли на бугру, там колодец. И они работали, они стреляли вот туда. А эти вот тут делали провокацию. Хотели же потом же, чтобы все поверили, что это русские вот это тут сделали.
Ага,
это я видела своими глазами.
Как ложный флаг,
конечно,
да?
Конечно, да. Как ложный флаг.
Yep, well, there you go. Ukrainians are putting on Russian uniforms and using tanks to blow up stuff. Nothing new. It was just more of the same. But they were caught by the Ukrainian people on the ground who know what they're doing and continue to talk about it whenever they are actually asked. Anyway, let's move on. We got just a few more stories. So one of the most, brainless drivel coming out of the Biden administration, and of course it's, gets megaphoned by the Mockingbird media, is that Russia is causing a worldwide food shortage. In regard to that, what they claim is that Russia is blocking the ports in Ukraine of all of this grain that's supposed to, save the world. The reality is that the grain that Ukraine could actually export is about 1/8 of 1% of the world's grain. So this is not going to be a make it or break it thing. Furthermore, Russia is not actually blocking the ports. Ukraine mined all the waters, both in the Dnipro River and in the Black Sea. So we're going to go real quick to a little bit of that story.
Not clear. And is that in Ukrainian territory? Because my understanding is to leave here you have to go through Ukraine-controlled territory. So is those mines in Ukraine-controlled territory that you're worried about, or in Russian-controlled territory?
Actually, the mines start in front of the Nikolaev area, and from the Nikolaev area to Odessa. Area. There is a large area. There's too much.
Ukrainian
control.
Yeah,
Ukrainian control area.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. The Russian military and forces help us too much, and they guaranteed, okay, you can leave this port, but this is the situation. There is too much mine in front of us. So we need maybe some escorts to show where is the safe place to passage. So the ships not move like this in this situation because of the mines.
And just for context, this particular ship, which is in a port on the Dnipro River, is containing fertilizer, actually, which the fertilizer being blocked from Russia due to sanctions and from Ukraine due to Ukraine mining its own waters is going to be causing a worldwide food shortage next year. It's gonna make what's happening now worse. And just switching gears for a second here, we're going to go cover something from your favorite financial planners, the World Economic Forum. You will own nothing and be happy. Oh yes, so definitely something to look forward to.
This mad dictator Putin, who is a fan of Stalin and a continuer of his policy, we need to stop him completely, isolate him completely, and make it so that no other country in the world suffers this again from a dictator like that.
And frankly, I've lost patience with these people. This is basically just a dumb bitch, and she thinks she's freaking special because she's part of the World Economic Forum, part of the Satanist Club, and, well, clearly she's foaming at the mouth with her hatred for Putin, which everything that she says about Putin actually applies to her and to Soros and to the whole World Economic Forum, because they're a bunch of frickin' Nazi imperialists, and that's what they are. That's the reality of the thing. So, whatever. Let's move on. There's one other thing at the World Economic Forum I want to get to that Gonzalo Lira pointed out.
We are trying to go back to your nuclear power plant in Zaporizhia, which is the biggest nuclear power plant in Europe. 6 nuclear reactors, 30,000 kilograms of plutonium, 40,000 kilograms of enriched uranium.
And what he points out, what Gonzalo Lira actually pointed out while watching this, was that that's enough plutonium and most likely, I don't know about the uranium because you have to enrich uranium to a particular point. So it's not about kilograms so much as by percentage. But as far as the plutonium is concerned, that should be enough to make nuclear weapons, which is something that Richard Barris actually brought up a very long time ago. It's in my first Russia-Ukraine video, which is how the media is lying to you about Ukraine. Now, I've mentioned multiple times on this channel, starting with my very first video, which I just mentioned, that the military situation on the ground escalated when Ukraine, specifically the NATO forces of Ukraine, invaded Donetsk and Lugansk and began to shell civilians. I just wanted to show the actual Minsk agreement. This is the agreement that Ukraine agreed to when it surrendered to Donbas in 2015. This was negotiated by Angela Merkel because German troops were surrounded and were about to be captured by Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republic forces. So that's kind of the history of that thing. If you'll note, it basically says they're not supposed to have any artillery on the ground. Of course, amazingly, the CIA fact-checkers, check the facts of what the CIA does and find out that the CIA is totally fine on this in invading Donetsk. And they're like, oh, well, you don't know who's shelling who from the OSCE. And my answer is well, if the Ukrainian military weren't there and if they didn't have artillery shells, then no one would be shelling anybody, because, the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics are not going to be shelling empty land. So it is what it is. You see clearly how, and I'm about to show you the information of the OSCE, you see clearly how that the situation is relatively calm, and then it suddenly escalates as 60,000 Nazi troops invade Donetsk and Lugansk and start shelling the civilians. And certainly within these numbers, many shells are probably return fire. But you're not going to have the Donetsk People's Republic start shelling nothing. They get shelled first. And that information is verified by people on the ground who were being killed at the time. You can just go look at Patrick Lancaster's channel to see it for yourself. All right, so on February 12th, there are 0 explosions. Between the 13th and 15th, there are 41 explosions. And that's around the time that this army starts to show up. On the 16th, there are 76 explosions, so you're already getting an uptick. On the 17th, there are 316 explosions, so that's a massive increase. On the 18th, there are 654 artillery explosions. On the 19th, there is 1,413 explosions. And on the 20th and 21st, there is 2,026 explosions. On the 22nd, there is another 1,481 explosives. And on the 23rd, you have 1,410 artillery explosions. And after that, the OSCE stopped counting because that's when Russia intervened at the behest and formal request of Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics, who were formally invaded by Ukraine. So don't give me your bullshit, you stupid fact checkers. And don't tell me that 7,400 explosions in Donbas between February 15th and the 23rd had nothing to do with the massive invasion force that's currently getting surrounded and annihilated by the Russian army. You know, they had nothing to do with each other. I'm not stupid, and you're a frickin' lying scumbag. Every single one of you blasted fact checkers is a scumbag. Also, on a different note, I ended up seeing Matt Walsh's What is a Woman documentary, which was very fun and worth the $14. I still think Ben Shapiro is garbage and a lying sack of shit for the military-industrial complex, who I despise personally. Matt Walsh, though, I've always loved. I think he's great on these type of things. And honestly, if I were ever president, or if I were ever to give advice to the president, I would tell him to put Matt Walsh as the press secretary so that he can own those libs every day and just show them up, because he's great at that. Anyway, I didn't just bring up Matt Walsh or the movie, as a social thing, but rather it relates directly to some news that we've covered about the CIA, and especially CIA history, and how wokeness is actually a weapon of the Leviathan movement, or like the CIA specifically. It's been using trans ideology and feminism in order to damage the American people. They do it because they're satanic, but it also doesn't just separate people from God and make them evil, but it also damages them psychologically and leaves them very vulnerable to propaganda and emotional psychological warfare. And sure enough, one of the people that was mentioned in the film was a guy named Kinsey. And my first thought when I saw it was, I'm like, dude, I bet this guy was a CIA asset, and I bet he worked during the MKUltra mind control experiments. And sure as shit, I am really good at this stuff. You know, it's like, once you understand what these people do, you can just look through history. You know which ones are them. In the future, you know which ones are them. You know what they're going to do. You know what they have done. Here you go. Not only was the whole trans movement made by the satanic Nazi CIA by giving access to children, I believe orphan children, for sexual torture and experimentation by this pedophile Nazi doctor. It was all done under MKUltra, and on top of that, the Rockefeller Bank, which is part of the ruling class, was also involved. So, yeah, not a shocker. It is what it is. Well, no wonder they hate Putin so much. And to close us out, we just have a lovely, lovely message from Leviathan itself, bragging about how they are running PSYOPs programs against America and against the world, how they are toppling foreign governments, how they are running the big tech censorship, literally bragging about all the illegal, vile things that they have been doing, saying that they are everywhere, that they pull all the strings behind the scenes, and they are just have all this power. And literally, as they're doing it, they're literally talking about how they're demon-possessed and that they love the devil. And I just can't explain it any better than that. These people are vile, vile creatures, and they literally can't help but talk about it and brag about it. So here you go. And I apologize in advance. This will be a little bit creepy because these people are very demonic and there's a demonic influence in the shit that they make. But I figure I'll put it anyway so that you can really understand what these people are like.
As the world watches and listens in horror, the peaceful pro-democracy demonstration in China comes to a violent and bloody end. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Wolves hiding nearby, whispering do or die around me. You say your last good night while I
There is another very important phase of warfare. It has as its target not the body, but the mind of the enemy.
The target of psychological warfare is against the enemy's mind.
It is words and ideas.
The ammunition used by Psywar.
Its mission is to influence the thoughts of the enemy soldier, and at the same time
is expected and encouraged to study foreign languages and the social sciences such as history, economics, and sociology. He must have a broad and sympathetic understanding of all phases of human experience.
Gripping at my skin, the walls of night closing.
But the use of this force as an integral part of combat has now taken on new form.
As I wait to say my last goodbye.
These are the Psywar soldiers.
Well, I have a message for you. You think you're great? Well, you're not. You're a deceiver. You think that makes you powerful to lie to people you were sworn to protect? You're not good. You're not strong. You're wicked. You're evil. You're satanic. You are just like your father, the devil. And just like him, you will be judged.